Hi, I'm Matthew, Garden Center Manager here at Earth Works in Jacksonville, Florida. Today I'm going to talk about creating a fragrant garden. I think a lot of times the only fragrant plant that people think about in the garden would be the rose. However, here in Northeast Florida, we have a lot of different options of plants that we can use to create a very fragrant and beautiful garden. So stick with us for a few minutes and I'm going to explain not only about the plants, but how they grow and how to use them in the landscape. First plant I want to talk about is the Confederate Jasmine. Now the Confederate Jasmine is a vine. It is vigorous. This thing can grow very quickly. It's evergreen and can cover a fence or a trellis within a few years depending on the size of the trellis or the fence. What's nice about this is that it grows very well in our climate here in the southeast. It's very hardy and it flowers. The flowers are very fragrant. If you have a large expanse of the Confederate Jasmine, this plant can light up any yard, and sometimes even a block or more away you can smell this plant. Very, very intense. Fast grower and very reliable. The next plant I want to talk about is the Sambac Jasimine. So we just talked about the Confederate Jasmine, entirely different plant and not closely related. You're going to hear the common names of plants that sound very similar, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're related. So the Sambac Jasimine is a bush, not a vine. It can be kept at whatever height you would like. It can grow upwards of 4+ feet if allowed. However, keeping it well below that's very easy. Now this blooms during the summertime when it's hot. The Confederate Jasmine blooms during the spring, early. So if you have one of each plant in the garden, you would have a fragrance in the garden from spring through summer. And we'll be talking about some other plants that will get you through fall and even into wintertime for fragrance. So Sambac, not the most common plant at the garden center. Here at Earthworks, we definitely carry it when it's available, and a very easy plant to grow. The next plant I have here is the Frostproof Gardenia. All gardenias are fragrant. This just happens to be the Frostproof. We carry several varieties here at the garden center. The white flowers are abundant different times of the warm season. So this Frostproof is still blooming now, but we do have others like the August Beauty and the Miami Supreme, which bloom at slightly different times. So if you had a few different varieties of gardenia, you'll have fragrance all throughout the warm season here in Northeast Florida. Each variety grows at different heights, but gardenias don't grow so fast that you can't keep them under control, keep them nice, tight, and shaped. You can make them into hedges, or you can have them planted as individuals, and they look really nice standing alone or as a hedgerow, and very, very fragrant. The next plant I want to talk about is a little bit different and doesn't have a large showy flower like the other three plants I talked about. This is called the tea olive. And the tea olive is a slow-growing shrub with very small, almost inconspicuous flowers. They're very small. However, the fragrance is not inconspicuous in the most remote sense of the word. You can smell the flowers of the tea olive probably a football field away, if not more. I have smelt them from one side of the nursery to the other. They're very small, they're not very showy. However, the fragrance is very distinct, very sweet, and the plant is generally very easy to grow. Now, the tea olive blooms off and on throughout the year, so you'll have some spring flowers, you'll have little pops throughout the warm season, so you'll have nice little surprise notes from the fragrance off and on throughout the warm season here in Northeast Florida. Next one is called the sweet almond bush. Now this can grow into a small tree. I think it looks really nice as a small tree, so if you wanted a small ornamental tree, maybe 10 to 12 feet tall, this would make a great tree for that, and it gets covered in these long, slender white flowers that are very sweet. It smells a little bit like a cross between vanilla and almond. So when I first smelled this, it reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen, especially around the holidays when she'd make cookies when I was a little boy. I remember smelling vanilla and almond when she'd make cookies, and the first time I smelled this, I thought of my grandmother. Very cool plant, very, very unique fragrance. I think it is a must in any garden here in Northeast Florida, and pretty easy to grow. Now, another category of fragrance in the garden has nothing to do with flowers. It has to do with the oils that are trapped inside the leaves. This is the Florida anise. It is a native plant and it has a very unique fragrance which most people find pleasant. So you can crush the leaves And when you smell them, they have a very bright, aromatic, and very pleasant. So there's nothing wrong with walking through the garden, grabbing a leaf as you're enjoying the outdoors in your property, taking a leaf, crushing it, and just smelling it. It's amazing, amazing fragrance. Now I saved one of the most exotic plants that we have in stock right now for last. This is the Plumeria, otherwise known as Frangipani. And this plant is grown throughout the tropics. It is associated with Hawaii. I believe they still use the flowers when they make the leis. And they come in multiple colors, in multiple fragrances, and every one is amazing. Every variety, very showy, very tropical, and the fragrances are to die for. I had about 4 or 5 of these in a tree form in my yard some time ago, and all the neighbors, when they'd walk by, were going on and on about the fragrance and how they could smell it throughout the block. And unfortunately though, they're tropical. And they had grown so big, I was growing them in containers, and the containers were in the ground, and I'd pull them out each year, put them in the garage, but eventually they grew so large that it was just too much. And unfortunately, they did not make it through that winter. And but with a little bit of protection, they can be brought indoors, or they can be covered with frost blankets. Very easy to grow. Their only weakness is the frost that we can have here in Northeast Florida, but they are definitely worth having. They are a showstopper for sure. Now the other neat thing about this plant is that it's propagated by taking cuttings. So if this plant gets too large for you to move indoors, you can simply cut it into smaller bits, stick it in a pot with some nice potting soil, and then overwinter it in the garage or indoors, and then grow new plants, give them to friends, or if you live in the area, bring them to Earth Works and I might buy them off of you. But the fragrance and the beauty of these flowers is really amazing. They're very unique, and they're definitely a conversation piece in the garden. Throughout the year, we carry lots of different fragrant plants. Some of the fragrant plants that we don't think about are also herbs. So things like mint, rosemary, thyme, basil, fennel, dill. Those are all great fragrant plants, but it's the foliage. So by literally brushing against some of them, even lavender, brushing up against them will release some of the aromatics, but at the very least pinching off a few leaves and crushing them releases them, and it can be very therapeutic. I love walking through the garden that has different fragrances in it, and I can interact with it in multiple ways. Besides just pulling weeds, sometimes it's nice to have a fresh fragrance in the garden. And they also make great cuttings. And for the herbs I was talking about, we all know they're obviously edible as well. So there's lots of benefits. So taking those cuttings from the plants will release the odors from the herbs. Making arrangements for yourself or for friends is a great way to utilize the herbs in the garden. And here in Northeast Florida, we can grow herbs all year round. Now some herbs will do better in the winter, some will do better during the warmer season. But between all these fragrant flowers and the fragrant herbs, there's no reason why you can't have something that smells amazing all year round. If you have any more questions or want to see some of this selection, please stop by Earth Works. We're here 7 days a week. Monday through Friday, we're open from 8 till 6, and Sundays from 10 to 5. We'll see y'all next time. Hey everybody, I almost forgot. Water lilies. Water lilies are also very fragrant. So you have a large bowl that contains water, or you happen to have a koi pond or ornamental pond, water lilies are amazingly fragrant. They come in so many different colors, sizes, styles, different types of leaves. If you have water at least a foot deep, you can grow water lilies. I highly recommend trying it if you've never done it before. They are very easy to grow, but the flowers are so beautiful and the fragrances are unlike any other of the fragrant flowers that we talked about earlier today. So check them out. If you don't have space for an aquatic plant, just come by Earth Works, get your nose right here, and take a whiff. See y'all.